Welcome in. It is Big Ten today on a Wednesday. Truly great to have you with us. We are fueled by Gatorade. I'm Dave Revson, and Tuesday night we got some answers to the questions college football fans had about the college football playoff ranking. We had speculated for weeks, and now, as Ashley Adamson joins me, Ashley, we've got a few answers to our questions. Fired up to be with you and fired up to talk through all of this with you.
Yeah, I'm excited, Dave. As always, as I say, this is truly my favorite hour of the week, and I mean that more than ever this week. And there is some excitement because, as the disclaimer that I always say when we talk about these first and second and third CFP rankings, like the only one that matters is the one that comes out in December. But it's fun for us, and it's a fun insight to see, what the committee thinks.
Well, that's where I'm with you. I mean, I agree with everything you said, but the only one that matters is the last one. However, this does give us a lens into the way that this committee is thinking. And every committee thinks a little bit differently, which is maybe part of the problem. There's not a concrete structure year to year.
Humans are the problem. Yes, it's that human element that's the problem.
The human element. But, of course, we complain about the computer element, too. But let's get to it. It's our big story, in case you missed it. These are the rankings. The top 12 essentially was the AP. You see the Big Ten rankings, and the one exception is in those Big Ten rankings. Ohio State is second rather than third. Remember, Georgia is second in the AP rankings, so they flip-flop with the Bulldogs. Aside from that, the top 12 directly mirrored the rankings. Ohio State 1, Penn State 7, Indiana is 8. And so here's what that means from a bracketing perspective. And the thing to remember here is the 4 highest-ranked conference champs get a bye. So BYU, as the projected Big 12 champ, would end up as the 4 seed, even though they were 9 in the rankings. That bumps Ohio State down to the 5 and moves everyone else from 5 through 8 down a spot. Since no conference can have 2 byes in this setup, the Bucs would have to play in the first round. They would host Boise, and that would be for the right to play against BYU. Penn State hosts Notre Dame, and Indiana would go to Tennessee. So, Ashley, give me your big picture takeaways as you looked at that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, it's impressive that a third of the field and 4 of the top, 8 teams are from the Big Ten.
Yes.
And to your point, I think it is worth reminding everyone, like, how seeding works, because at first glance, it may look a little confusing to see Ohio State as the second-ranked team, but the number 5 seed. Right. And so that is, of course, the biggest difference in the new 12-team format. Not only is the format different, though, Dave, like the CFP has a new executive director in Rich Clark. They've got a new committee chair in Ward Manuel, a familiar face for Big Ten fans. The Michigan athletic director gets the very fun task of having to speak publicly for the committee. So we can get into some of what he said last night. But my biggest picture takeaway is that I love that we're talking about 12 spots this year instead of 4. Like, the final month of the season is going to be as entertaining as it's ever been because so many teams are still in contention. And particularly, I look at a team like Penn State, whose fans are probably not feeling all that great after last week, but you're projected right now to host Notre Dame in a first-round game. Like, that's the beauty of the 12-team playoff. I
agree 100%. And when you think about the possibility of that game, were that to come to pass, it would be one of the biggest games in the history of Beaver Stadium. And I do think, this is a really cool part of the playoff, the fact that we're going to have those first-round games on campus. I think it's an opportunity for fan bases to be involved in it in a way that they haven't been before. First of all, as you mentioned, 3 times as many teams are involved, so you're just the mere multiples of fans that can do it. But I just think for a lot of fans, it's more palatable regionally to be at your home stadium than it is to travel to a playoff game somewhere else. And obviously Penn State, if you use that example, would have never been in the college football playoff to this point. So from that point of view, it is huge for them as well. I felt like Penn State, maybe we start there. I felt like they were treated pretty fairly. Like, I'm interested in your take on kind of where the various Big Ten teams ended up. Like, to me, Penn State, they don't have a great win to hang their hat on, frankly. Yeah. And so I think kind of where they are, I certainly don't think that Penn State fans can complain. I think you kind of look at that scenario and you think, if we win out from here on in, we're going to be in this playoff. As you mentioned, probably hosting a game. So I think it worked out reasonably well for them. Is there a Big Ten team that you don't feel it worked out well for?
No, I think everybody should feel good about the spot they're in. And just to follow your point on Penn State, like, we know that now how the committee values a loss or how a team loses. Ward Manuel made that clear when he was talking about why Oregon was ranked ahead of Georgia. So Penn State's close loss to Ohio State, Dave, like strangely may be something on their resume that's helping them, because when you look at the schedule, like they don't have any ranked wins. And they most likely aren't going to have any when all is said and done. So the committee, of course, only counts ranked wins for teams currently in the top 25 of the CFP. So it doesn't matter that Illinois was ranked in the AP back in October when they played. You look at that Minnesota game, I mean, there's a world in which that could end up being their best win.
Yep.
So Penn State fans, Sky Yuma, practice it. You want the Gophers to keep winning. You obviously want the Illini to keep winning as well. But I don't know. I think everybody should feel pretty good. Of all the 4 Big Ten teams, like I think everybody's in a really good position.
Okay, so I disagree. I think that Indiana should have been higher. And I think to make the point, like I get the strength of schedule thing. You can only play the schedule it's laid out for you. I do think it's fair to point out Indiana canceled the game against Louisville. They did that a year ago. They did it long before. I think they knew what this season would be. It made sense for them at the time. Would people be viewing them different had they played that game? Certainly had they won it. I think absolutely they would be. Hindsight's 20/20. Maybe they wouldn't be. Maybe they wouldn't have gotten off to as great a start if they had a game like that early on. So I think you can play both sides of that coin. But putting that aside, Ashley, like I look at Michigan from last year and I look at Indiana from this year. And I think Michigan last year, the thing we got from the committee when people were talking about, well, they haven't played a great strength of schedule is yes, but we're watching the games and look at what they're doing on the field. They are crushing people. Yeah. And the committee was right, by the way. They were completely accurate in their assessment of Michigan a season ago. And so I don't understand, other than what we were talking about earlier, which is a different composition in the committee and kind of no hard and fast rules that you have to go by on a year-to-year basis. But I don't understand why they would be viewing Indiana crushing people dissimilarly to Michigan crushing people a year ago. I think Indiana is much better than where they were ranked last night. They will have a chance to prove it. They'll certainly have a chance to prove it against Ohio State. To a certain extent, they'll have a chance to prove it against Michigan. But that is the one Big Ten team that I do not believe got a fair shake.
So I totally agree. And what a world we're living in, that number 8 for Indiana and the CFP is not high enough.
Fair.
Like, I love that. And I think your point is, though, exactly right. Like Indiana's biggest opportunity, unlike Penn State, it's still in front of them. So this ranking doesn't matter because they're going to have a chance to prove that they belong in the very top tier. I thought Ward Manuel's insight on why the committee ranked Indiana above BYU told you a lot about how they value what the Hoosiers have done, because despite not having a ranked win on their resume, he pointed right away when he was asked about it that they lead the FBS in point differential and are beating teams by 33 points per game. So there are a lot of detractors that I'm seeing on social media who I'm trying not to get annoyed by, who keep saying like, well, who is Indiana beat? They have such a soft schedule. Why is nobody talking about this? And I feel like our guy Joel Klatt put it perfectly. Nobody has done to their schedule what Indiana has done to its schedule, like full stop. They have been playing lights out. And the thing is, like I said, the opportunity in the next couple of weeks to prove that they belong with the elite teams. You beat Michigan, you beat Ohio State, all that noise will stop. And I think, you know, what did Curt Cignetti say yesterday before the rankings came out? He said to get caught up in these and lose focus would be the kiss of death. And that doesn't mean that he doesn't hear the noise, because I know that he does. And Cignetti is keeping all the receipts, Dave. If you need any proof, you just go look at his Twitter account. I love this stuff. I was looking back through some of his old tweets. Right? Like after being down to Michigan State on Saturday, he quote tweets the final score with, well, I guess we know how we'll respond when we're behind, which I think was so good. And then week 7, after they absolutely eviscerate Nebraska, Coach Sig drops the, well, I guess we passed that test, like chef's kiss, so good. And then you even go back to week 3 and remembering heading into that UCLA game and his whole thing about we don't care about the Rose Bowl. It could be a parking lot. This is a business trip. After trouncing the Bruins, he just, a simple taking care of business, never daunted. So the 2024 Hoosiers are to this point one of the best stories that I have followed in my 17 years of covering this sport. And honestly, to all the people out there who are still doubting Indiana, just keep it going, keep it up. Like the doubt seems to be like the perfect fuel for the Curt Cignetti rocket ship.
I agree. And I agree with you also that they have those opportunities in front of them. I guess I just don't understand why they kind of have to prove people wrong based on what they've done on the field, just eviscerating people. I do think one thing that's maybe getting lost in the shuffle here that people aren't talking about that isn't necessarily Big Ten related, but I think it's interesting because it could dictate opponent for the Big Ten is, like you mentioned, BYU, right? And BYU had the narrow wins against, a not very good Baylor team and not very good Oklahoma State team. And regardless of how you think that should affect where they're ranked, I think it maybe tells us that they're not invincible. Their schedule is pretty easy down the stretch. I know they do still have to play Arizona State, who's pretty good. But were they to lose, let's say they lose in the Big 12 championship game, Ashley, like there's no guarantee that those four spots for the byes are going to the four power conferences. Like there's a world where if BYU loses due to the way that the Big 12 has kind of cannibalized itself, if BYU loses and Boise State wins out, that Boise State could have one of those four byes. Like, that's not unreasonable at all. And I don't think people are really talking about that and how that would change the complexion of this if Boise State were sitting for you, with all due respect, at that number 4 spot.
Yeah, no, Dave, I'm with you. And I think that's what's fun about this year, right? Like for a decade, we've talked about this as the 4-team playoffs and the margin is so much smaller. The margin is way bigger now. And because of the way the seeding works and because of, the top 4 highest ranked conference champions getting that bye, it's all going to change. I mean, there's so much that is in play and this thing is going to look a lot different. I'm curious about your spot, your take on Ohio State. They're ranked number 2, which is a spot higher than where they are in the AP. And of course, as you mentioned, like in this projection, they would host Boise State in a first-round game. I just got to say, like, things are looking a heck of a lot better in Columbus than they were a week ago, which is what we've seen with a lot of teams this year, right? Like, it never is as good or as bad as it feels.
Yes, I would agree 100%. I think Oregon and Ohio State are where they belong. Oregon is clearly the best team in the country. And then if you look at Ohio State in the context of Oregon, where they were essentially one play away from beating Oregon on its home field, I think where Ohio State is really makes sense. And as we look at, the top 2 teams in the CFP rankings, before we leave this, I want to get your take on Oregon. I don't think there was any doubt that this is where Oregon was going to be. They're the unanimous number 1 team in the country. It would have been crazy had the committee not had them as the number 1 team. But kind of your thought on the Ducks, aside from the obvious, or maybe it just is the obvious, that they are where they belong.
Yeah, no, the Ducks, they're the only team with multiple wins against the top 15. It's the first time they've ever been in the top spot of the initial CFP ranking. And there's not a ton to say on the Ducks, who are exactly where we thought they would be. They've earned that right. And when you look at their remaining schedule, home against Maryland, at Wisconsin, then a bye to get ready for a home game with Washington, like, I expect Oregon to be 12-0 for, the second time in school history. So Oregon at number 1 is right where we thought. This, again, Dave, will all change. There's so much more to talk about. But it's been fun and it's been exciting to at least get the first taste of where the committee's head is at.
Well, we will get to all the good stuff there is to talk about a little bit later in the show. We're going to take a break and talk some hoops, though, next.